roofs. We have a good training lined up. It looks like the recording has started, so you can access this later, hopefully. We're going to talk about a bunch of different aspects of green roofs today. We have a good training prepared with a few different speakers. So today I'm going to be starting us out. My name is Travis Ostrom. I'm with the Center for Watershed Protection, and I'll be talking a bit about just giving an introduction, getting us all on the same page, and then talking specifically about how DOEE, or the Department of Energy and Environment, regulates the design of green roofs. We also have on Greg Hoffman with us. He's also with Center for Watershed Protection. So we are going to be both available to answer questions. And then we have with us Ed Snodgrass from Emory Knoll Farms. So Ed is the owner and president of Emory Knoll Farms and an expert in the green roof horticulture. He's spoken widely and published a number of books, participated in projects around the world and research related to green roofs. So he's a great resource to have on. He's going to talk with us about green roof plants. And then we have from the Furbish company, Claudia Littmann and Thomas Wheeler. So they're going to lend us their expertise and experience over the past 20 years or so that Furbish has been installing and maintaining these green roof systems. So there's a wealth of knowledge there that they're going to lend to us on the maintenance aspects of green roof systems. So getting into the webinar mechanics, just first off, it's a little bit hard to participate in real time with so many people and so many little boxes and faces off on the side of the screen. You'll see me glancing off to the side. That's me looking at your faces if I can, and in the chat. But the best way to do this really is we're going to try to reserve questions and answers and discussion for the end of each section. So we have ample time programmed in after each of the 3 sections of this training for questions and answers. So at any time, please don't hesitate to throw something up in the chat. That's where we'll be looking at the end of each section. We'll go over any comments anyone's made, any questions. So we want to encourage participation. This is a really good opportunity for us all to be together and to raise, more than what's going to be on these slides that we've got, just a limited scope. So if there's anything that you have a question about, anything you want to point out, anything that you want to get clarification on, please don't hesitate to throw it in the chat, and we'll get to it at the end of each section. So on to the green roofs and the particular design regulations for DOEE. First thing I want to do is get us all on the same page about the benefits of green roofs. So this is your first opportunity to participate. So go ahead in the chat. Everybody type in something that you know about green roofs, some benefit from your perspective of green roofs. What is it that green roofs mean to you? Why do they matter? Why do we do it? So take a few minutes here just to throw it into the chat. I have to actually figure out how to get the chat to appear. There we go. So I don't know if you can see them coming up here. So we've got GAR score. That's what I'm looking for. Good. So I'm going to maximize my chat here. So I'm going to just go back through and read through some of these. So we've got energy savings for the buildings, heat island effect. A couple people mentioned heat island effect, stormwater management, aesthetics. The GAR score. So this is for anybody who's not familiar, in DC, there's this particular program called the Green Area Ratio. Stormwater retention, heat island effect, energy savings, stormwater retention, runoff, getting a lot of heat island effect. So sufficient space, as somebody mentioned, the particular way of trying to meet the stormwater in the kind of particular needs of space constraints, right? In the building footprint. That pollinator support, that's a good one. Sustainability. And a few of the others, amenities, so it's attracting wildlife. So there's quite a few. Air quality, all right, there we go, that's a new one. Had a few people, and then carbon sequestration, someone mentioned. So a lot of benefits here, right? So there's a lot of different reasons why we come to green roofs, a lot of different approaches. We're going to be speaking mostly about the stormwater management benefits, or at least I am in this section. But it's important not to forget about all this stuff that we've just mentioned here, right? There are a lot of benefits, and it's part of why this is such a beneficial and such a, you know, a buzzworthy, exciting type of best management practice for stormwater, because it's one that has so many other co-benefits. So in DC, we break the green roofs into two general categories. So there's the intensive, so you're seeing in this photo, it's more, you know, larger scale planting, so higher shrubs, can even put trees, and then extensive, so these lower profile, characterized by a lot of sedums. The big difference for DC here is we characterize these by above 8-inch media depth or below 8-inch media depth. So that's the differentiation we have. In general, green roofs, we have a number of different layers, each one with a specific function. This can vary from system to system, but in general, we, going from the bottom to the top, have the structural support, the building or whatever structure it's on, and then a number of protective membranes to make sure that structure is protected from the things we're putting on top of it. So insulation, roofing membranes, all of these things that are important to make sure that the green roof is not going to be detrimental to the structure it's sitting on. When we're talking about the green roof system in terms of the stormwater benefits, we're really looking here at the top 3 layers. So we're going to be looking at this drainage or water storage layer, as it's sometimes called, the growing medium, and the vegetation. And each of these layers has a very important role to play when it comes to stormwater management. And the vegetation, the growing media, and the drainage layer are all essential layers when you're designing these systems. So we're going to talk about those requirements for those layers and those systems, and it's all coming from this Stormwater Management Guidebook. So it was last updated in January 2020. If you've never looked at this, please go ahead and follow that link in the bottom right. Read through it. In particular, section 3.2 deals with green roofs. So that's where all of the regulations specific to green roofs are going to appear, the guidance on how to design them, what landscaping, maintenance, all the calculations that I'm going to talk about today are all coming from this guidebook. I'm just going to touch on a few of the key specifications though. So there are a lot of different vendors, a lot of different systems out there. DOEE does not prefer one or the other. They allow a lot of range of vendors, a lot of different systems, but they all have to meet the ASTM specifications. So there are the minimum specifications that must be met. The green roof system has to comply with setback requirements for HVAC and electrical equipment, and then there are other building codes that are relevant, structural, fire codes, roof access. So all these other things that are beyond really the scope of the green roof system itself, but must be considered in the design. When we're talking about the drainage layer, the roof slope, and the roof drains, it's all with the idea of making sure that you can convey this overflow. So we want to retain smaller storms, but you also have to design the conveyance system to be able to handle those larger storms. So this is as you would for any roof. You have to have roof drains, downspouts, that sort of thing, to be able to safely convey the excess runoff off the roof. So for a green roof, that drainage layer really helps out with that function, making sure that whatever goes through the media leaves and doesn't create a saturated over the long-term condition underneath that, which could be detrimental to the plants, could be detrimental to the structure below. And then getting into the stormwater part of it, we really recommend that the contributing drainage area, so this is the area that contributes runoff to the green roof, be limited to the green roof itself. We allow up to a 2-to-1 ratio of the contributing drainage area to the green roof area, but we recommend that it just be limited to the green roof area. So I'm going to get into some calculations here. This is the key calculation that you're going for whenever you're submitting a design for a best management practice in DC. What you're trying to do is maximize your retention value that you're getting out of this BMP. And so section 3.2.8 of the guidebook goes over how this calculation is managed. So for green roofs, the retention value that you get for this BMP is equal to the storage volume that's calculated. Right? This isn't the case for all BMPs. Each BMP has its own different way of achieving this retention value. But for green roofs, it's just equal to the storage volume. And the storage volume is calculated as a function of the storage volume in the media and the drainage layers. Right? So you can see that plant cover, then there's the growing media, filter fabric, and the drainage layer. So that storage that we're achieving in those two layers of growing media and drainage layer is the total storage volume, and that's equal to the retention value. We're going to walk through a calculation here. So hopefully everybody loves calculating and looking at plans, because we're gonna, I know this sometimes can scare off some of the landscape folks, but please don't worry. It's very simple, and we're gonna walk you through, and you're gonna get to do an example at the end. So you're gonna feel comfortable with it, hopefully by the end. So the storage volume, that's what we're trying to get, right? Storage volume is in cubic feet, and it's equal to a function of the green roof area itself, so the surface area, looking, if you were a bird looking down on this green roof, multiplied by the storage depth, right? So the depth is all that big messy thing in the brackets, which is a combination of the storage in the media and the drainage layer, right? So you've got two things inside there. So let's look at this kind of piece by piece. The media depth, that little d, multiplied by the maximum water retention in that layer. All right, so this is going to be something that you submit test results and you verify the maximum water retention. Multiply that by the depth of the media, and you get the water that's going to be retained in that depth. You get the same thing for the drainage layer, right, where you're going to submit water retention results for that material that you're proposing. So all of that in the bracket is a depth times a surface area. We have to get a conversion factor here to get it from, you see we've got some inches there and a square feet. So to get it all into feet and to give us the cubic feet. Right? And then the final thing that we have to look at is the irrigation factor. So the irrigation factor, as I mentioned before, we have the extensive and the intensive differentiation. For those intensive plantings, sometimes they need a permanent irrigation source, right? You're going to have some plants on there that are going to need more water than some of those more drought-resistant sedums that you get on the extensive. So if you are installing a permanent irrigation system, you have to put in an irrigation factor of 0.5, right? So you cut your storage in half, essentially. If you're not irrigating permanently, if you don't have a permanent system, the irrigation factor is 1. All right, so let's walk through an example. We're going to break this down. Go ahead, everybody, if you've got one handy, grab a pencil and paper. You can go along or do it in some other fancier computer version. Go along and let's do this all together so you are actually doing it. It'll help you retain it better, I think. So we're going to look at an example plan shown on the left here. So you can kind of see, if you can see my cursor, hopefully. They've shown here, delineated this kind of plus sign hatching. There's a green roof here. It has the BMP ID of 2-1, right? So this is the BMP that we're talking about. You can see there's the roof drains and the overflow drains throughout it. And you can see in this hatching, or sorry, this dashed line that's around it, that's the contributing drainage area. They're showing this upper roof area that's going to contribute drainage down onto the green roof. So there's about as much area here on the upper roof area as there is of green roof area. So that's that 2-to-1 ratio that I was talking about earlier. And then they've designated here this point of discharge. So that's something you have to show. So you can see the green roof area here. It's measured as 5,242 square feet, right? So that's our surface area in our equation, right? So we're trying to find this storage volume on the left. We're just going to go through methodically here and fill in all of our variables on the right. So our first variable here is the surface area. And now we're going to have to go on to the cross sections to get some of this other information. So let's look at the typical cross section. So this is for an extensive green roof. And so you can see on their cross section, they're showing the growing media, they're showing the drainage layer, they're showing the insulation, and then the structural deck below. So our growing media is going to be 4 inches right there. That's 4-inch media depth. Then the drainage layer, 2 inches right there. Right. So then we've got the surface area and then the media and the drainage layer depths. Then we're going to go on to another sheet in the plans, which is where you actually submit these test results showing the verified media maximum water retention on the left. And then on the right, there's the verified drainage layer maximum water retention. I apologize, some of this text is probably too small for you to read, but up here, the sample ID is for an extensive green roof media. And then the one on the right is for a water retention and drainage layer. So this is a mineral wool material that's being used. And I'm gonna note here where this is. So this maximum water holding capacity is shown here at 51.8% for the media. And then the retained water is shown here at 93% for the drainage layer, right? We write these in decimal percents. So you've got 0.518 and 0.93 for the media and drainage layer water retentions, respectively. So we're moving right along. We have most of our variables filled in. The only thing we need now is the irrigation factor. So we have to figure out, is this going to have a permanent irrigation system? Throw in the chat, does anybody think, is this going to be an irrigated system? Anybody? No, good. So it's not going to be an irrigated system because it's an extensive green roof, right? You can't have permanent irrigation on an extensive green roof. So in this case, the irrigation factor is 1. If it were an intensive green roof that had a permanent irrigation system, the irrigation factor would be 0.5. Right? So let's bring all these numbers back. Here's our big messy equation. There it is with all the numbers plugged in. This is, if I were teaching my students, I'd actually be mad at them for having this equation without any units in it, because I think units can help you find mistakes. So I encourage you to keep your units as you're going through, but this is what we've got. So you can see the irrigation factor is 1. We've plugged in our maximum water retention capacities, the inches of the depth for the media layer and the drainage layer, and then the surface area of the green roof itself. Then we have the unit conversion there of 12. So our total stormwater volume we have 1,718 cubic feet, right? So that storage volume that we've calculated, that's going to be the retention value that you're going to achieve for this green roof. Excellent. Oh, good. Thank you. I saw a couple people put a more accurate version there in the chat. Thank you. So there are a few factors that can affect the green roof retention volume. We've mentioned a few already, but just to highlight them specifically, the contributing drainage area. So it's limited to no more than twice the size of the green roof itself, right? So if you have 5,000 square feet of green roof, you can have no more than another 5,000 square feet of non-green roof contributing drainage to it. So a total CDA of 10,000 square feet. And you also must show how that runoff is distributed over the green roof. That's a very important thing that we miss a lot on plans. Permanent irrigation is prohibited on extensive green roofs, but it's allowed on intensive green roofs. In the case where there is permanent irrigation, though, it must decrease your storage volume by 50%. All green roofs do need a water source, though, for establishment and drought periods. So that's an important thing to differentiate between the permanent irrigation system and a irrigation system or water source that's available for irrigation during those times. Solar panels can be used and are encouraged over green roofs. You just must allow for sufficient space for maintenance access, right? So there's a diagram in the guidebook showing basically that there is a minimum available space between the rows of solar panels that's required to get someone in there to physically get in there and pull out weeds and do whatever else they need to do underneath those solar panels. And then there's at least a 1 foot, and one side of that, the panel has to be at least 2.5 feet minimum to be able to get someone under there and maintain them. Right? There's a kind of one note on this that it says a 6.5 foot max on the solar panel. This is based on common solar panel sizes. If the solar panel is bigger than that, that's fine. You just have to adjust the ratio of open space to solar panel size to increase the gap between the solar panels to make sure that you're not covering your whole roof with solar panels, that there's open space to be able to get the light and moisture into there. A few key items for when you're submitting your development plans, your stormwater management plans. Make sure you pay attention to that contributing drainage area and show how the water is routed. That's almost, it's one of the most common comments that you'll get from the plan reviewer looking at plans, is to show that contributing drainage area, show how it's getting to the green roof. You have to show the plant schedule or the plant species list and the landscape plan. So this is one thing that's overlooked as well, which I'm sure Ed is would steam at to see the number of plans we get that don't actually even have a plant list on them. But you have to specify the plants and specify the maintenance and the minimum plant coverage. You also have to provide that manufacturer documentation for the maximum water retention. If you don't have manufacturer documentation, the maximum water retention values you can use is 0.1 and 0.0 for the media and the drainage layers, respectively, which is very low. So you're going to want to make sure that you've got manufacturer documentation for the system you're specifying. And then show your calculations for the storage volume. This is something that happens not just for green roofs, but for a lot of BMPs. You have to show your work, right? You have to be able to verify that you've done your storage volume calculation. We have calculators available online on DOEE's website that you can use for calculating these. So that's also helpful. But you have to be able to do that storage volume calculation and show it on the plans. So that's all I have on the general side of things. Does anybody have any questions? I've got a few in the chat, so I'll start there, and then please go ahead and throw any more in the chat. Let me scroll up and make sure. I think there were some from the beginning. Sorry, just scrolling through here. Okay, so we have Paul Herons asking to speak to the IRMA versus non-IRMA assembly details. So I'm not actually familiar with the IRMA assembly details. Paul, are you on? I don't know if you can unmute Paul, if you can clarify. Or if Greg, if you're on, if you are familiar with that. Circle back to that one at the end. Sorry, Paul. We'll keep you in mind. We'll circle back to that one at the end. So we have a comment from Isaac. Extensive systems generally not irrigated, right? So that's a good point. That's actually they're not allowed to be irrigated in DC. So that's some key thing to remember, that you have to have a water source for drought conditions or for establishment, but you can't have a permanent irrigation system. And then we have a question from Matt W. If the green roof is piped to a cistern and the cistern is used to irrigate the roof, does that affect the retention volume? So that's a really good question, and it kind of depends on the specifics of the contributing drainage areas. So a cistern and a water harvesting cistern is another BMP in DC. So you could have the cistern be a BMP, but if you're including the cistern as a BMP, the water retention you're achieving from that cistern already is accounted for in the cistern BMP, right? So, the irrigation water that you're using from that cistern, whether it's a green roof or a landscaped area, it's already accounted for in the cistern BMP, right? So you wouldn't be able to double count that irrigation water on the green roof, right? You can do that setup though. You just have to be careful in how it's accounted for. So you could also not include the cistern as a BMP and then just use it as like a means of getting the CDA to the green roof. You might have to play around with the numbers there and see how it works out. If you are irrigating the green roof with a cistern or with any other irrigation source, you're going to have to apply that irrigation factor. So a few different ways to do it. You can make that setup, and it's probably a good setup to do. You just have to make sure you're accounting for it correctly in terms of which BMP or where the retention value is accounted for in the different BMPs. Right? So you can do that irrigation system. Yeah, thank you. Best management practice is a BMP. So you can do that system, but you just have to account for the retention in the correct places. We have a question from Eli. We've got, are setbacks required in the green roof where it surrounds the solar panel supports? There's no specified distance required, so just whatever it needs for that manufacturer to actually specify to, put the supports in. There's nothing prescriptive in the DOE guidance. Required setbacks from parapet walls. So this is a good question. There are no required setbacks from parapet walls. There is a 1 foot setback from roof openings, but if the parapet is designed correctly, there is no required setback there. There's there's no need necessarily, other than possible maintenance considerations, which Claudia and Tom might talk about in their experience, but there's no requirement that it be set back from the parapet wall. And then a question if there was a hard copy of this material on the DOE website. So we have the green roof information in the guidebook is on the DOE website. This training, I'm not sure if we're going to have this available online. At some point we will, but we'll have to get back to you on that. Setbacks to mechanical equipment and HVAC. Right, so if we're talking about mechanical equipment that's elevated, it's the same requirements as a green roof, or sorry, as a solar panel over a green roof. So that same 2.5 foot minimum, and then the 3 feet of access on either side of it. In terms of the actual equipment sitting on the surface, green roof surface, I believe that is the same as a roof opening. Not off the top of my head. I'm just looking through here. The setback. Yeah, so there's no setback requirement for the HVAC systems, right? Moving on here, we've got the Teresa Lynn has a question. So for corrugated plastic drainage layers, could void space be calculated to determine the maximum water retention percentage? Typically, the MWR is not provided by the manufacturer. So no, in this case, the maximum water retention is based off of a specific test that's performed by saturating the media or the drainage layer or both combined, and then calculating the maximum water saturation that occurs there. So you can't just do it based on calculating void volume. Oftentimes what we'll see with these plastic drainage layers is they'll be tested alongside or as part of a full system. So you'll see the drainage layer, the corrugated plastic with the media, and then they'll test that as a whole unit. So that maximum water retention that you're getting for that test, that system, will be both combined. So in that case, you would use a combined depth and a combined maximum water retention. It may be difficult to find the actual water retention of just the corrugated plastic layer in some cases. So if that's the case, they do need to have some kind of testing, at least with the media, and then you can combine them. But you can't just do it by calculating the void space. It's a good question. Yeah, and there's a clarification there for best management practice, the BMP. So for this, so it is a good point. So somebody's pointed out here that in the DOEE manual, in the guidebook, there's a section on page 34 that discusses a 2-foot setback or vegetated free zone from the edge of the roof. So this is a recommendation, and it's generally a good recommendation for if there is no parapet, right? So it can be relaxed if the parapets have been properly designed. So say if there is a parapet, it doesn't have to have a 2-foot separation. I think you'll see I'm assuming in Claudia and Tom's presentation that there are cases where those areas along the parapet and the edges can get either too shaded or there are maintenance issues associated with that. But the design of it, there's a 2-foot recommendation, but there's not a requirement if there is a parapet. Okay, and then we have a question, if you could clarify about the ratio 2-to-1. So the ratio is 2-to-1, and we recommend that it be 1-to-1, right? So this is for the CDA to the green roof area. So we recommend that you only design the green roof to receive runoff as direct rainfall, and that we allow a credit up to 2-to-1. But part of the reasoning there is that the distribution of rainfall or distribution of runoff to the green roof is very difficult to achieve with larger drainage areas. And then there are some particulars about certain systems. If there is a drainage layer that allows water to bypass from side drainage, so if there's runoff on one part of the roof at the same level, draining horizontally to the green roof, most systems allow for that drainage to pass underneath the green roof media without saturating the media. In those cases, that side drainage area is not eligible to be included in the contributing drainage area, right? So you're only allowed to use that contributing drainage area from an upper level. But when I'm talking about a 2-to-1 ratio, and Cameron's clarifying here, it includes the green roof, right? So the green roof itself, and then another equivalent amount of roof area, right? So that's the 2-to-1, the total green roof area or total contributing drainage area to the green roof area has to be a 2-to-1 ratio, right? And Andrea Krug, who's a DOE reviewer, pointed out that part of the reason that we recommend the setback from the parapet is to prevent wind uplift. So this is one of the things that we see in the maintenance experience, that if you have that vegetation right up against the walls, you have that potential for wind uplift. Great questions. Does anybody else have anything more? we'll also have time at the end. So let's go ahead and go on to, I'll put my contact information back up at the end, but let's go ahead and pass it over to Ed Snodgrass to talk about the plants. I'll stop sharing here. Oh, there we go. There we go. All right, we're seeing your presentation, Ed.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yep, sounds good. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Travis. That was incredible, Travis. Thank you so much. I don't know. I'm going to have a lot less math and possibly more Latin. So, so the formula for plants really is the climate you live in plus the available root zone, and then the plant's ecological type, and that gets you to whether the plant can survive or not. And then you combine that with what are you trying to achieve with the plants? So are you looking for high evapotranspiration? Are you looking for pollinator associations? Are you looking for aesthetics? There's a number of different services that the plants can provide. And so it's more thoughtful than just, putting plants down without much knowledge. And then the key is really establishment. And I think Claudia and Tom will get into this, but establishment to me has three different phases. There's the initial planting time, and then there's a period of time shortly after the planting. And then there's this kind of almost 2 to 5 years, depending on the type. But my experience, having dealt with this for 25 years, if you really get these systems established well, your long-term maintenance is very, very easy. And we have roofs here at the farm over 20 years old, and there's several I haven't pulled a weed in 5 or 6 years. So they can get very stable, but only if you establish them really correctly. So I can't emphasize that enough. The establishment is really key. For climate, I think one of the best tools is the Köppen-Geiger climate classification, because it not only does the USDA does kind of a heat zone and the maps, the cold hardiness and heat zone, but Köppen-Geiger looks at a bunch of different things and also potential evaporation. So you have a city like Melbourne, which has very, very dry air compared to DC. So you're going to have a very different kind of plants. So and they're getting more and more precise with this. So it's a good map. DC is in the CFA is their category for DC, and I just pulled up Silver Spring here. So it's characterized by fairly evenly distributed rainfall and that statistically we are 48 inches of rain in imperial measurement and about 4 inches a month. So it's a very, very favorable climate to grow plants in, but it's also a climate that you have to manage stormwater every month compared to a Mediterranean climate, which has a true wet season and dry season. So it's really good to grow plants in. This might surprise people, but we are actually a subtropical climate in DC, and it's characterized by hot and humid summers and cold to mild winters. So our really challenging plant time is actually where we are right now, July and August, where the temperature stays up at night, and many of the drought tolerant plants around the world are in climates where it cools down at night, and they are not used to metabolizing all night to stay cool. So plants cool themselves by pushing water through their vascular system and creating evaporation, just like an air conditioner works. And if they're not adapted to climates with warm nights, they can just exhaust themselves. Essentially, like if you were hiking in a desert and you sweat and sweat until you don't have any more sweat, then you go into um, hypothermia. You go into a state where you just couldn't cool yourself down. So there are plants that suffer in our climate. So really knowing like the provenance of where plants are from is very helpful. The other thing that most people don't think about is what ecological types. So Grimes, who was a professor at University of Sheffield in England, worked on this. And typically, extensive green roofs are using stress tolerators. So they are plants that have evolved to really tolerate a great deal of stress, and that would be lack of water, high solar radiation, uh, very thin root mass. Those are kind of the stressors that are typical. Uh, as opposed to that, you have competitors, which are grasses, composite flowers, things that really take over. Now, stress tolerators tend, because they're from high stress environments, they tend not to be competitive because nothing else can live there. They've never had to develop a competitive strategy. So they tend not to be high in seed manufacturing. They don't spread rapidly. So that's why you see sometimes on a poorly established green roof, you'll see weeds come in and the specified plants will really not compete well. So, and gets into, that's why you don't want irrigation on an extensive roof, because you're just bringing in the competitive weeds, and you want higher stress. You want that stress for the specified plants. The other category are annuals, and so they usually come in ecologically after a disturbance, a lava tongue, a fire, or even agricultural plowing and disking would be a disturbance, or a bulldozing for development you'll a lot of times see these annuals come in. So I'm going to go through kind of what you see on roofs a lot of times and just talk a little bit about. So I think one of the most common is a mixed group of succulents, and so they are common because they don't take a lot of weight. You don't have to have a lot of inputs, and inputs I would consider water and fertility. So the fact that there's not a lot of inputs means that down the downspout, there's not a lot of nitrogen and phosphorus coming off. It's certainly more than just bare roof with no soil. There's always going to be some nutrient coming off any system that has soil. They tend to be very low maintenance, but they are very limited in design and in what Travis was talking about with all those benefits. So they are really very functional in terms of stormwater, but you can't layer on things like vegetable production, or they're not highly aesthetic, or maybe they're not the greatest for pollinators. So, and you can do them by plugs. This is U.S. tax court. There's a ton of different module companies that use this, and then of course the vegetated mats. So this is the one category where all three methods are available, and then in subsequent categories you start to eliminate the modules and mats because you just can't do the type of plants. You can't roll up anything that's not succulent, so that if you try to grow perennials in a mat and when you roll them up, you kill them. So the mats are really limited to this mix succulent category. So there's some projects. So you can take this same group of plants and you can separate them and create a little more designed look, but the maintenance will be higher because you're now maintaining essentially a painting. So, but the other benefits are the same. So you see, there's the same plant groups, but you separate them for an aesthetic, and you can imagine that the maintenance is now a little bit different. And you can see kind of toward the upper right, there's one area where it hasn't done very well, and so your choice there in maintenance is, Do you keep replanting that? Or maybe it's just a bad specified plant, it doesn't belong there. Do you let the other ones creep in? So, you have to, this is going to be more maintenance and more sophisticated establishment for sure. This is another one. So many of these over time become mixed succulent roofs, just from an evolutionary point of view, because they all grow at different rates. But they are very appealing from an aesthetic. It's a nice little painting to execute. There are native plant roofs. The trouble is each area of the country, native means something else, and so there's no plant list that's universal in the U.S. So it's going to be a very local thing, but there are some real opportunities, not only for the association with pollinators, but we sell a couple plants that are on the threatened or endangered list. And so it's a way to actually do some plant conservation. You'd be amazed in botanic gardens that people come in and steal endangered plants from botanic gardens. There's a collector community. So rooftops can be a place where you could park plants that are under threatened or endangered list, and they're there to have their genetics can be put there until a later date if need be. It's much higher horticulture than just the stormwater roof, but then it's a higher benefit as well. And these can be from very, very shallow systems up to deep systems. So they can be in every level. It's just a matter of understanding how to specify these, how to establish them, how to maintain them, and even some might be annuals or biennials. So, and then in some cases for roofs on nonprofits or universities, there's also opportunities to put signage with them and educate the public on the value of natives. So the general thinking with natives is to find an analog in your area that's the roof. So you see in this Kestrel design sketch here that you have a rooftop which kind of represents a rock outcropping or maybe a bluff, and then you go out in nature and try to find something in your ecoregion that is an analog to that, and then you would do the botany to say, do we have something that looks like that, and can that go on a roof? And from my experience, you can find a lot of plants out in those areas, but only a fraction actually work on a green roof, because green roofs have a universal and very definite ending point at the membrane, where in nature you can see in the drawing with the two shadowy characters on the bluff, there are cracks and rocks. There are places where there may even be a spring. So you're going to have a much wider plant community on a natural area than you would on a roof. But it's a very interesting problem to kind of solve. This is at the State Department in Arlington at their language school, and this is a local Opuntia species. So this is actually a roof that had existing gravel ballast, and so there was no additional soil put up at all, because the roof wasn't scheduled for replacement. But we actually were able to put a group of plants on that could just root right into the gravel ballast, and with just a tiny layer of green roof media. So I don't know if it would give you any stormwater credits, but this is a really, really high pollinator plant, and also the seeds are good for birds. So this is an example of a plant that's really retreating in nature because it's from habitat loss. This is a picture taken 2 days ago on my roof. This is a plant called Liatris microcephala. And so I think it's also important to put pictures of plants up in July and August when the stress is highest, to say, this is a non-irrigated roof for the last 20 years, and you can have these little plant communities. And this is very valuable for this time of year when there are some nectar-loving species that are migrating through. So you're seeing the kind of European sedums in between, and then the liatris, and there's a milkweed in the upper right too. So this is in about 3 inches of media here. This is at the University of Melbourne, where I had the privilege to teach plant maintenance on roofs for 6 or 7 years. And so this is what we need in DC if any universities want to take this on, or nonprofits. So this is a way to really understand in your area what plants would be viable. So if you look at this roof, the line down the center, if you can kind of imagine a line down the center, everything to the left of that is non-irrigated, and everything to the right is irrigated. And then I don't know if you can see on the screens, there are numbers, but from the bottom left or the bottom right back, it goes from 10 centimeters to 30 centimeters in depth. So you're going from 4 inches to 12 inches essentially. And so you as a designer could go to this roof and say, okay, I have 6 inches of media, but I'm not going to irrigate. And I can go look at that group of plants and test. So there's about 200 to 250 varieties of plants on this roof. And it's also under the screen is also planted, which would represent a shade condition. So it's very, very helpful for people to come and see this and work on their specifications. And it's now about 12 years old. So that longitudinal information is very, very helpful. That would be a great thing to see. The other thing that you see, and I guess we could put slash vegetable production, but this notes that you could have a culinary roof. Herbs tend to be a little drier loving than vegetables. So this is a restaurant on a hotel, and the green roof is designed by the chef. So he's telling the landscape designer, here are the herbs I use in the kitchen, and here's the amount I need. And then they work out a production schedule. And this is very high in maintenance, but it's high in value for the kitchen, and also for the hotel, that they can advertise that their herbs come from on site and they're organic. And so there's kind of a marketing piece to this, and also a value that they have a reliable source of herbs for the kitchen, and that the menus are designed to be in coordination with the green roof. And they actually traded a local group, a gardening group, access to their health club for free maintenance. So I think by the time you weed a roof all day, you're not going to a gym. So I think they got that for free. Then as you go deeper, and this is getting into, I think in our region, greater than 8 inches deep, where you can really start to get into perennials and grasses. And you can do this in a non-irrigated way, but you would want to, the first year, have a good bit of water to get that root zone out fully into the media. And then you would have to monitor, like this year we had the driest June in 80 years. So things can really crash. Even 8 to 12 inches, because it's green roof media, it's not a lot of clay in that soil, so it's not storing water very much at all. These roofs are made to drain. But that said, it has much higher value from an aesthetic point of view and a real estate value. So this is at the University of Sheffield with my co-author Nigel Dunnett, and this is done through the university, very much like the University of Melbourne, but with a deeper system. So this is monitored over time, and you're going to see, like, those grasses that are blowing, that's Stipa tenissima, and that's a real weedy character. So they're going to look at that and say, does that just take over the roof eventually? How would you maintain this design? What things are receding? You can put things in like bulbs, so you could have an annual display of tulips and daffodils and things like that, and then they would go away how do you design for 4 seasons? So this is a much more complex thing. Obviously, because it's going to have more uh, open fractions for stormwater capture, and it's going to probably pump water out and dry the system faster because there's a greater leaf area index. So it's going to recharge the system for rainfall, uh, whereas a succulent roof, if you get 2 rains back to back, those voids may not really be that open. So these more herbaceous roofs tend to dry out a little quicker. This is an interesting project. So this is kind of the lesson here is there are 3 different plant groups on the same footprint in the same block. So the lower left, that little stripe you see down at the bottom is very shady. So those are all shade perennials. And then the next roof up are sun perennials. And then the next roof up are all succulents. And the top roof is just harder to get to. So the owner said, I don't want to climb up and down that ladder all the time and weed, where there's a door out onto the other 2 roofs, and weeding is a lot easier. So you can have these 3 different conditions. You could have a native, perennial, and succulent roof on the same building potentially. Then I would differentiate native from habitat, because there are ways to design for habitat that may include things that are non-native. So it's a little bit of a parsing of that, although most of the time native roofs will be superior in habitat, but cities are very stressful on insects. And so to really offer kind of a February to November nectar and pollen source, you may have to bring in plants to fill in those gaps in the season. And they may not be the most beautiful thing, and they're very, very knowledge intensive. So you're getting from not only the discipline of understanding how to build on a green roof and on structure and horticulture, but also things like entomology and bird expertise and macroinvertebrates and reptiles. I mean, you're getting into a pretty broad thing. And so again, this is at the State Department. So you're starting to add things like a little bit of butyl to create some water storage for insects to have access to, or birds have access to, some dead wood, some shelter, creating windward and leeward conditions for insects, some different mineral shapes and sizes for things like spiders. So all these will have a slightly different insect community in them, and so, but to the person looking out the window, they may look at that and go, "Yeah, I don't want that." So it has to be communicated to the viewing audience, if there is one. It's possible to have this on a warehouse where no one would see it, but in this case, people are looking out, and there is signage inside the building that explains what you're looking at. So that it's valuable ecologically, but not always like high aesthetics. This is in Switzerland. They have a lot of endangered species that are spiders. They're doing whole green roofs or spiders. So you're seeing these conditions. This is really pretty close to zero maintenance, but the spiders like all these different sizes. So they're looking to build this population of spiders back up. Also in Bern, this is to protect ground nesting birds. So they are looking at really designing for birds that do ground nesting. Now, ground nesting birds do not regurgitate food into their young's mouth. That's only nesting birds. So the babies have to get up and forage right away. So they learn that there's that gravel area, like killdeer in our area, you would see them on roofs. They have to hatch out and then find food. So you have to have very low vegetation around the nesting area because the babies can't fight through that tall grass and they would just starve to death. So then you go, there are obviously going to be more insects to predate upon as the foliage gets higher, but they have to get strong enough to walk through there. So there's an understanding between the vegetation and the and the life cycle of the birds. Then the plant selection, when you're getting into habitat for insects, you have to provide both the nectar source and the pollen source, and the larval source. So this is Cecily gumiferium, and it's a Mediterranean plant, but our swallowtail species love to eat it. So if you have this on the roof, you're going to attract a lot of swallowtails, and then you'd have a native plant maybe for the nectar. This did attract a little dinosaur there. So, but this is a very strong plant for migratory butterflies, especially in all the swallowtail. All the swallowtails go to umbelliferous plants, so plants with an umbrella-shaped flower. Again, this is on my roof a couple of days ago, and when you're designing for habitat, you're maintaining differently. So you want to leave the stalks of plants that are hollow up because our solitary pollinators lay their eggs in hollow stalks. So when you cut all these back for the winter, you're actually killing all the eggs of this group of insects that we care about, these non-colonizing and stingless bees, these little tiny bee and fly species. So, and you want some open areas. So you have this kind of what they call an open mosaic landscape, where there's some plants and then some open area. So, and then you can see I've sown cosmos in there for nectar, and so there's a late charge of nectar just using annual seeds. We do, kind of got into the horticulture of this, and we have a mixed flat for regional pollinators. Not to, it takes a lot of work to find this stuff out. So we're trying to help out with that kind of stuff, and that's kind of what it looks like. It's not easy to grow these things, different plants in one flat. So, but we're working it out. And then just the reward is seeing, so this is a fly, this is a flightless wasp. Bumblebees are really endangered, not endangered scientifically, but they're really in decline, and we have a lot of species of them around, and they're pretty easy to attract back, but they need some help. A lightning bug, getting some nectar. This is a fly species on a sedum flower. Again, a bumblebee, and you can see the big pollen mass on its little pad there. So they're very, very happy there. This is a salvia. So once you get this stuff, they're going to come around. Now, if you want butterflies, again, so this is their larval source, and you also want a place for them to hang their chrysalis. So you've got to offer more things than a green roof. There's the Cecily being eaten by a swallowtail. A little hanging shelf, an overhang, and this could be actually under a solar panel or things like that. But they got to have a place to hang the chrysalis where they won't be predated on. And then lastly, I'd always like to make the pitch for integrating the roof with the greater landscape. I think this isn't done enough. And so schematically, you would relate your street tree planting with the roof and the wildlife that would be around. You have logs, you have rocks, you might have a little wetland. The parapets are offering windward and leeward conditions. The leaves might blow up on the roof and create some biomass. So this whole kind of general wildlife ecosystem could relate to the ground. And many times you see that one landscape architect is doing the roof and there's another one doing the grade. So that right on the same building site. So it'd be good to coordinate those things, I think. There are examples of really good stormwater management on these zero discharge parking lots. You know, using this big human brain of ours. Using parking lots, this is in Essex, England, using local demolished housing and putting in gabions. And this is fantastic for insects and other wildlife that likes to crevice nest. And there is plenty of nectar for insects. There is almost no nesting area. That's what's really going. And good signage to educate the public. So there's a parking lot that's wildlife friendly. So rather than all those concrete barriers you can pull up, if you smack your car into the gabion, it's not going to hurt the gabion. So really, really good places for solitary pollinators to get in there and nest where they won't be disturbed. Just kind of some examples of that. This is in Portland, where this notion of integrating the roof to the stormwater at grade, the curb cuts, the paving rises just a little and forces like a stormwater speed bump and forces the water into the curb cut. So just these slight changes in elevation will direct the water in there, and that, in coordination with the green roof, gives you very high performance. The plants are designed to be inundated and then dry, and the trees are essentially big evapotranspirators. This is a daylet stream. This is a stream that used to be through a pipe, and it goes now through a constructed stream. It's a seasonal stream, again, in Portland. So, you know, we're putting back in the city this biology where it was all in asphalt and pipes. And that is my presentation. So I guess I'll stop sharing there. I don't know how to I don't know how to answer questions or anything. So, Travis.
Okay, good. Here we go. I'm unmuted. Thanks. So it looks like we've got one question here. Well, we had some comments on how beautiful some of the photos were and the cool insects that you're showing. And so someone's asking, MJ Bardwell is asking, do you think that the height of the green roof affects the visits of the different pollinator insects, or as long as we offer food, they will visit?
Yeah, I mean, they're flying up. Yeah, you're not building buildings taller than most insects can fly. That would be, and when you get into places like Manhattan or Chicago, the shape of the building really doesn't lend itself to a big green roof. Those they're really small at the top, so they're not, you know, that's not a big deal for insects. I think what would suffer there would be the relationship between the at-grade landscaping and the roof. So the closer, like a warehouse and a landscape combined, would have a greater symbiosis than something that's 80 stories up.
So it looks like we've got another question here. What are some species that might need to be limited surrounding a green roof to prevent drift?
I don't know what drift is.
So I think like in terms of the getting a species drifting into a different part where they weren't specified, I think that's what they're referring to.
The plant species drift.
Yeah, I think so.
You hire Claudia to weed out the, you know, that's a maintenance thing. That's very hard. I mean, that's, you go back to the ecological triangle, the competitors want to move. So if you put competitive species on roofs, you're going to have to insert yourself into that equation. And plant species that are slower to move, you have less maintenance, but more establishment period. Is that kind of getting at the drift question?
Yeah, Catherine says yes, that makes sense. You find that I have a question kind of related to that. The challenge of sort of having the sedums that don't compete so much and the gaps between them getting filled in by these weeds, as you mentioned, and trying to find a balance between things that will outcompete the weeds, but also not, you know, spread and make a whole new composition that you hadn't intended.
Yeah, I think this gets into something that's probably not done enough on green roofs, and that's succession, like making it a successional ecosystem. So starting with, like I said, let's say a 10 centimeter, 4-inch roof is largely sedums in the beginning, but I've transitioned our roofs into more kind of low prairies. So the in between, because the small leaf sedums are really pioneer species, and the broader leaf sedums are more long-term species. So if you start using, and the small leaf sedums tend to be used in mats and modules a lot because they fill in very quickly in the beginning. But over 5 or 6 years, they probably will recede. And I think a good strategy is to get some good perennial species in there, like Talinums and Liatris, Bigeloia, that are also native species. And then their seeds occupy that space as the small leaves. So it's a successional strategy, and it can be done at the time of planting, but it also can be added as part of maintenance. And green roofs tend to get a lot more biologically active about 4 and 5 years in, where you have higher successes with perennials because the soil biology changes. Green roof media is very sterile biologically in the beginning because it's mineral, but eventually fungus and bacteria, in the positive sense, those things come in and they colonize, and then that leads to a wider option for plants later on. So, you know, that's, if you want it, you can take a sedum roof and make it much biologically wider over time.
Thanks. Yeah, that's really it's interesting to think about that successional planting like that. It's not like a one and done kind of thing. Anybody else have any questions for Ed? We can also circle back at the end if anybody thinks of anything. But let's go ahead and thank Ed for his time and move on to Claudia and Tom.
Thank you. I'll share mine. Okay, is that everyone seeing that? Green roof maintenance? Can you hear me?
We can see the slideshow, Claudia.
Can or can't?
We cannot. We see your desktop.
Is that working?
Yep.
Sorry about that. Okay, so yeah, thank you for inviting Furbish, Travis, and Greg for inviting us, and we're glad to be here with Ed. Um, uh, just we give our experience in green roof maintenance. Our company Furbish has been in business for 20 years. Our founder, Michael Furbish, started the business and early on got into green roofs, green roof installation. When it was becoming developing in North America and Mid-Atlantic and some of the other cities. So we've been along for the ride for quite a while. Way back at the beginning, we were just there was some maintenance occurring on the roofs that we were installing, which were few at the time. And fast forward to today, we are currently maintaining over 3 million square foot of green roof in the Mid-Atlantic. We are in the District of Forest, Northern Virginia, Maryland, and we also have some roofs up in Philadelphia and some of the other parts of Pennsylvania. We are on well over 300 different sites, so we see lots of conditions, lots of applications. And our approach for maintenance, we call it stewardship. So we're not just reacting and maintaining to what is there. We're really looking at it from the beginning, from early establishment and very successful establishment early on, and then seasonal maintenance as the years go through. Not just a one-off here and there, because you won't get a successful move with that sort of plan. So being proactive and thoughtful in our approach. And then the other piece, and Ed was just talking about it, we really embrace evolving ecology. There are specific planting designs, but really there's green roofs have lots of different conditions or where they are. And even within a one green roof system, there might be varying microclimates. A shady area, there's different elevations potentially on a building. There may be shady areas, areas where solar reflectance is a factor coming off of windows. There may be little wind vortexes creating wind scour. So different maintenance practices have to occur, but also different species are going to do better in different areas. So having the very specific design, as Ed said, yeah, you can have us go out there and for many repeated visits and kind of being there more regularly like gardeners. If you're looking for more of a low cost maintenance, where we're doing our more typical and typical being about 6 visits a year to keep the stormwater management system in functioning order, healthy, plants healthy. We'll want to be there at least 6 times a year. But we will nurture along and work with the plants that are working in that area. So in a shady area, you may find your spruce seeding variety working well, and in the sunnier areas, the broadleaf sedum chaticum is really thriving. So yes, there are the mixes, and you want the beauty and the development, but sometimes in little sections, you're going to see one species predominate over another, and we embrace that because what we're finding from our customers, commercial, residential, schools, hospitals, vegetated coverage is the end goal, and that's really what we want to keep the stormwater management system. So that is our approach. So so why green roof maintenance? You have your stormwater management system, do it. But the regular routine maintenance is going to, keep that system functioning as intended. Where the plants that are intended to be there will be there, and with maintenance throughout the seasons, keeping out the unintended plants or weeds is key to that success. We're also clearing drains, scuppers, roof drains within the system to ensure that the flow of water is occurring as intended. And it's protecting the investment. We have seen plenty of roofs, and we'll show you some pictures later on, with neglected, where a system has been neglected, and will come in and remediation or renovation is required. And that is quite an expensive endeavor. So the routine maintenance up front is really protecting your investment. And also another benefit of the green roofs themselves is that this system of overburden, these layers of green roof, are protecting that roof membrane, particularly from UV exposure and then the fluctuation in temperatures, both of which can degrade a roof membrane. So your green roof is really kind of maintenance is not just protecting the system itself, but the green roof is also protecting the investment on the building, the green roof membrane. I'm sorry, Travis mentioned the two systems in DC, the specific definitions. Just to break it out a little further, the extensive system is that more shallow system, 6 inches or less. It's mostly sedums. Some accent perennials will survive there, like dianthus, talinum, alliums. These are on all types of roofs, but certainly are on those roofs where the mechanicals are, the HVAC equipment, and sometimes are not seen by anyone. But also, they may be in view of from windows or from amenity spaces. And these are your lower cost systems, although green roof in itself is not a low cost, but those are the low cost systems. A semi-intensive is more of a 6 to 10 inch. You could start introducing perennials and grasses in these systems. More moisture could be held there, more nutrient, and then those species can thrive. And then, of course, there are the intensive systems. We are seeing these more and more. Buildings are incorporating these intensive systems as amenity space features. So you're satisfying your stormwater requirement, and you're also, especially on higher end residential buildings, having these wonderful amenity spaces, which are quite beautiful. And those still have your sedums, perennials, and grasses there, but now we can introduce shrubs and trees. Some of those planters are 4 feet depth or more. But you can have that much more variety. And of course, the frequency of maintenance is going to increase there. And there will be higher water requirements, from irrigation, as Travis was discussing. But I will make the comment that those, from a maintenance perspective, those visits aren't that much longer or more extensive than the sedum. So with our sedum roofs, we are spending a lot more time managing weeds. Weeds come to the roofs by birds, by wind, and by foot traffic. So particularly when you're on where the HVAC systems are, if there are no pathways, people are walking on them, you're going to be introducing weed seed regularly. So by us going there routinely, we can keep those down. When you're getting to your perennials, these are bigger plants, they're taller, provide a little more coverage, protect the soil a bit better, and actually are shielding out more weed seeds. So it's a bit of a balance there. We're spending more time maybe cutting back grasses or doing other things, landscaping practices, but not as much of the intensive weeding that sometimes is required when weeds take hold. Cost factor. So I imagine you'd be interested in knowing what really goes into what drives the cost of maintenance. so the doing maintenance by and large, it's mostly labor. There's not a lot of materials involved, and it's the time spent that we're on the roofs. But additional time is needed when if there aren't safety features, and which we do see, and I have been in the business for 6 years, and I've seen a change in that time where more and more we are seeing better fall protection, better safety measures. But there are unprotected edges and sometimes without roof anchors. And so this is going to take a maintenance company and a crew a lot more time in order to be safe. So we're up on roofs, there is risk. And so we have practices, and safety is part of our training and number one priority. But if there are decisions being made about not putting protective edges, higher parapets or davits, or if getting to the roofs, you have to jump over a barrier rather than a gate, and maybe that's near an exposed edge. All these things take more time. There's safety monitoring, so there might be one-on-one while someone is doing their work. So there's a person who's actually watching and ensuring that the other coworker is being safe the whole time. So that is something as far as the time it's going to take to service a roof. Access is another issue. It's great when we have access that we can walk through a door. Very often there's fixed ladders or ship's ladders and roof hatches. That all works out just fine. We have window access at times. But if you are having to go through units and going through windows of people's bedrooms or those kinds of things, which we do see quite often, or arranging to get through someone's condo unit and then to get up to the roof hatch, it just takes more time and planning to ensure that we can get on those systems. So that's another factor. Roof level water access. I believe Travis said that it is required in the district. We have many roofs that a beautiful green roof system is installed, and somehow the water access got value engineered off the roof level, and that is very limiting with establishment, but ongoing if we're going to be transplanting or introducing new plant material, it really limits our ability to do for success rates of establishment when that isn't there. So it is very important to have that when it's needed. The roof condition, of course, this is what we're talking about when someone has neglected a roof for years, and it's really not infrequent. We will get calls and go see a roof that has been installed with no maintenance at all. And then to get that system to remove the weeds, maybe work with the soil. There may be destruction from wind scour. There may be conditions, and again, we'll have some photos to show you. All of that are high costs to get that roof back to where it needs to be. Plus, you're going to need new plant material most likely. So keeping routine maintenance from the get-go is cost effective. And then the plant palette, I mentioned a little bit about before about how the sedum themselves could be more conducive to weed establishment and more hand-on weeding, whereas the perennials and these other and grasses take time doing that in landscaping practice, but there's less weeding involved, typical situations. The maintenance is on a seasonal cycle. We have our crews doing routine maintenance beginning in mid-March, and we'll go through November, probably even into early December. The sedum plants and perennials in the mid-Atlantic are dormant during the winter. So, mid-December through January, February, there's really not. So we're going during that growing season. And typically, on an average roof, we like to get there at least 6 times a year, twice in spring, twice in summer, twice in fall. There are roofs that may require are very large or have a higher aesthetic value, and maybe monthly visits or even more would be requested or called for. Then there are very small roofs that are protected. They're in very good condition and they're easier to maintain with less visits. So 4 or even 3 visits might suffice on those smaller systems. Our summer visits are typically longer. That's when there are different weeks throughout all seasons, but in the summer is when we are seeing the most weeds and then the most time spent on the roofs. I mentioned that the plants are dormant in December through February, and then we do, now that we are seeing more and more of these intensive systems with the perennials, we are able to keep our crews busier longer throughout the season, which is a challenge for us to keep our folks busy for year round. But we are able to do some of that work during the off season. And Ed had mentioned the benefits of also keeping the perennials, habitat for insects. Also want to make sure seed is dropped before we remove the stalks. And so keeping them longer and then going in the winter to remove them before the spring starts is what we would really like to do that. Let's see. So the most essential part of maintenance is that establishment period. The most essential. Ongoing is just as important. But the key to a successful green roof is really early on. That initial year is critical, and I would say it takes a minimum of 2 years to really establish a roof, no matter what you're planting with. Sedum plugs are small plants with big root systems, and those roots and the plant flushing out takes approximately 2 years to get that 85 to 95% coverage. When you're putting mats down, you put them down, they look beautiful, but those roots are quite young and smaller. So they come in looking nice, they do recess for a bit, and it does take that initial 2 years to really get those roots getting established and nice and mature. So, and then cuttings are another planting method, and they also will take that amount of time. But during that initial period, we would definitely go monthly for all roofs just to ensure everything is going along smoothly. We're irrigating properly. Sometimes birds or frost heave displaces plugs. We go back to reinstall those to maintain as much as the healthy plant material from the initial installation. And so all of that is happening in that first year, particularly. Thereafter, we can get to the more 6 times a year cycle. And then, of course, the irrigation with getting this goes hand in hand with that root establishment during that early period. There was discussion about permanent irrigation systems. We do see some green roofs outside of the district with permanent irrigation that are extensive. And after that establishment period, the green roofs really are designed to withstand drought, and having that permanent irrigation on with regularity as you would on a grade landscaping application is really just creating a hospitable environment for weeds. And also what we're finding is grubs. Grubs really like that wetter soil. So once your green roof is established and extensive, running that permanent irrigation, particularly running it at all really isn't really how it's designed, isn't necessary. So we prefer that they are not run for the extensive roofs. And now we're going to get into just what routine maintenance is. Tom, our operations and horticulture manager, will take over and talk about the the actual work we do up there on the green roofs.
Okay, so weed management is vital to sustaining the integrity and visual appeal of the green roofs. And weed control is one of the biggest challenges that we encounter while maintaining the green roofs, especially this time of year. And timely weeding efforts, targeting weeds before they go to seed, and tailoring our strategies according to weed species and weed life cycle is very important. So we consider flowering time, seeding timelines, again, plant life cycles, and ecological strategies that occur up there on the roof. And then we incorporate strategic timing for the weed removal to ensure that unintended plant material is removed. And it allows for the intended plant material to achieve desired coverage. And we've found that this requires approximately 6 visits per year to stay ahead of the weeds and remove all life cycles of the various types of weed plants that we encounter. Okay, so on to transplanting. So after weed removal, ideally we would have full or close to full coverage up on a green roof. This is where the establishment phase is very important. And achieving full coverage and desired coverage of intended plants is important, but some areas of sparse coverage do exist or will crop up. And if we are able to harvest cuttings off of intended plant material and transplant them into the system, we were able to fill in those voids that may develop with intended plant material of species that we are seeing performing very well. When we're transplanting on the roofs, we prefer to transplant in spring or fall to avoid periods of extreme heat or freezing. So the moderate conditions are really where the sweet spot is for transplanting on the green roof. Planting during the summer months is not recommended, and if it does need to occur, then irrigating is necessary. And that's why roof level water access is very important to have up on the roof, so our crews are able to irrigate freshly installed sedum plugs or cuttings. So a sedum cutting that is harvested from the green roof does not have established root systems for the most part. So it's very important to supply supplemental water for the plant until reestablishment does occur. Okay, so green roof and microclimates, Claudia alluded to these a little bit with her portion of the presentation, but with green roofs, there's not a one-size-fits-all approach. So there are varying climates within one green roof, and oftentimes the climate at grade on a property will differ substantially from the climate that we encounter up on the roof. And these microclimates can dramatically affect plant health and appearance. And a lot of times, our crews will encounter these after we are performing maintenance visits, and it is our objective to incorporate a fix into microclimates if there is some sort of plant decline that does happen. So when intended plant material does not perform well in microclimates, we incorporate new plant material that we feel will thrive in those conditions. I think we have some examples following. So here we have a roof in Philadelphia where we experienced extreme drought conditions, and it was a sedum roof. But we were able to do some investigating and found that the media layer that the sedum system was growing in was only 1/2 inch deep. There was a root barrier membrane underneath that 1/2 inch root growth, and it did not allow the root system to penetrate the actual green roof media below. And there was no supplemental irrigation being applied to this roof during extreme drought conditions. So that's the before image to your left. And then after we made this discovery, we were able to supply supplemental irrigation. We had on-site staff irrigating once weekly, and the after picture, so the picture to the right is after a year. So the green roof rebounded quite substantially after we were able to incorporate that supplemental irrigation schedule. into our routine maintenance. So in this instance, we had a sedum mat system installed in a terraced area. Buildings surrounded the terrace on all four sides. I believe it was 10 stories tall. And the conditions were not ideal for sedum growth. Very little sun exposure and moist, damp conditions. So after a period of time, the sedum began to decline, and we began to incorporate autumn brilliance ferns into the area. And after the course of 3 months, we have the picture to the right. That's the after autumn brilliant fern incorporation. So just incorporating a plant that we knew would succeed into this area went a long way. And it's important to take those considerations into account on the front end as well during the design process. So wind, I think Travis alluded to wind uplift when green roofs abut the edge, the exposed edging. So we have a roof here where there was some substantial wind uplift, what we call wind scour, that we encountered prior to taking over maintenance. And over the period of a remediation visit and sequential visits, maintenance visits, we were able to reestablish coverage. We reintroduced green roof media, and we've been irrigating these during our visits. It may require some wind netting to make sure that plant material remains intact and roots are able to establish and anchor the green roof media. The slope roofs. So these are a couple of roofs that are within our maintenance portfolio. Slope roofs, they present a unique challenge where water sometimes percolates to the downhill side of the slope. So the microclimate at the bottom of the sloped roof is quite different than at the top. And we can see here to the left and to the right, some of the vegetation is brighter and greener. And that is where the water is percolating to, and the plants are uptaking more water in those conditions. Oftentimes in these areas of high water, we're seeing much more weed presence. So a lot of our maintenance focuses on weed removal in those areas where the weeds are able to thrive. And at the top of these roofs, there is less water available for weed uptake. So weed success is limited, and weed germination or seed germination is less as well. And then exhaust vents. So this is a man-made microclimate. So we have here on the left an exhaust vent that was installed on a green roof, and the ballasted unvegetated area was not quite large enough, to consume the exhaust. So we extended the venting area and incorporated additional ballast because there was no way for us to achieve full coverage and vegetative coverage in that area with the exhaust vent being on air, hot air onto the roof itself. Is that it, Claudia? All right, so that wraps it up for us.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, we're happy to. Okay.
Okay, here I'm unmuted now. So there's a few questions in the chat. I'll just go through them and read them out. So the first one is if you could talk about what types of plants other than sedums you consider to have higher survivability without much maintenance.
Is this for Ed?
It could be either, yeah, really, if for, from the maintenance side or from the plant side. I think it came up right at the end of it, at the beginning of your presentation.
I think it's
Some of the greener species that we see high success with our alliums and dianthus, which perform well in both extensive and intensive systems, but really finding plants that do well in these microclimates or in different conditions on the roofs is ideal because each roof is going to be different. And then incorporating some of the mixed sedum flats allows the environmental conditions to kind of drive and select for the plants that are going to perform best within those conditions. Ed, did you want to?
Yeah, yeah, I think there's a strategy. There are some rock outcropping plants that Solinum will grow in an inch or two. I mean, it's just, and it self-sows, but it's very winter dormant. So it has a lot of advantage. But I think getting the matrix right helps a lot. Having accommodation between succulents and really strong drought tolerant perennials that have viable seeds, and they tend to find the open spots. A lot of these, I think in maintenance, when companies go in and weed and create open areas with no, they pull out all the weeds, unless you replant or have some sort of strategy to fill that in, you're in a weeding cycle forever because you need the plants to give coverage. Much like Claudia was saying with the taller plants. So weeds are very opportunistic, and many weeds seeds, they need light to germinate. So the seed bank could be there, but if you have good coverage, the weeds will never germinate. So they germinate with a light response. So I think that's one common mistake. People are weeding, but they're not replanting, and then they're locked in a cycle. One of the early weeds is a spurge, and once you get coverage, you never see spurge again because it's a light germinating annual. So those strategies have to be incorporated into the maintenance plan for sure. But there are a lot of good perennials to mix in for sure.
Excellent, thank you. We have another question about the media. So because the media has very little nutrients during installation, how much of a delay can there be between installation of media and installation of plants?
No delay. Plants, by and large, the sedum plants don't require a lot of nutrient, and it's part of why the plant selection is there. Our install team installs media, and then plants, follows up the next day with plantings. Typically, best practice would be to irrigate that soil to make it hospitable for those roots for the new plants to reach out into them. But there isn't a nutrient application. Once in a while, we may see an issue where we want to do that, and we've used mushroom compost. That would be our nutrient of choice. But I'll let Tom, do you have anything else to comment on that?
No, I think you touched on most of the talking points, but yes, we typically will follow up media installation with planting next day, and sedum is a very light feeder, so we do not typically incorporate a slow release of any sort at the time of installation. We will monitor the soil conditions and nutrient of the soil itself and make amendments as needed for the plant.
Well, I think the question is, could you put up the media and have a period of time? Like, could you put media up in November and plant in March? I think that was how I heard the question. I don't think there's considerable leaching of nutrients.
But I think leaving the media fallow would just open things up to weed seed bank establishment. Getting the plants installed immediately is ideal so that they can begin to root out and establish coverage and outcompete the weeds.
And providing a bit of shading as well for the media. I think I've seen some examples of media getting sort of scorched in that harsh condition on the roof without the plant coverage to regulate the temperature a bit.
Yeah, I think
provide
you're
that
right,
shading.
Travis. I don't think it's a leachate that takes the nitrogen out. I think the media gets so hot that the nitrogen volatilizes and goes out in the atmosphere. So there's a big, you see roofs that get poorly established, and it's very, very difficult to get plants established again because of the high temperature of the high surface temperature.
Let's see, we had another question here, which I think I might be able to address. Talking about the Furbish system used in a design for the past 8 years. They have an intensive green roof system of 4+4 with high storage volume. However, in the DOEE GAR worksheet, many reviewers do not credit it as an intensive green roof. Could you elaborate on that? And then Andrea chimed in asking what the material of the 4-inch storage layer is, assuming the media is only 4 inches. I don't know if we can unmute anyone here for this discussion. Let's see if I can unmute. I don't think I can.
Is
Can
there?
we unmute Andrea? Is
Yes.
that possible? Andrea, are you still on?
I am here, yes.
Okay, yeah.
So yeah, I haven't made the question, but I guess I wanted to learn more about this Furbish system. I did look online to try to find the detail. I couldn't, but unless the media is 8 inches, we wouldn't consider it as a category C2 in the GR score sheet.
So this is sort of a particular question to the GAR program, but it's kind of related to the stormwater. But the differentiation between the extensive and intensive in DC, it's the 8-inch threshold. And so in GAR, it's talking about just the media depth, right? So that 4+4 system would be 4 inches of media, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong here, folks from Furbish, but they would be 4 inches of media and then 4 inches of the drainage or the water retention layer. So that total 8 inches, but 4 inches of media is what the GAR is counting. So it's a distinction for GAR that matters in terms of the crediting. Let's see what else we have. So for intensive green roofs, here's another question. For intensive green roofs, after plant's establishment, the irrigation is usually required during drought periods. Could you elaborate more about the irrigation factor of 0.5 in storage volume calculations? So here's another one for me. So this is when we're talking about permanent irrigation systems, so that like if a drip irrigation or any sort of sprinkler irrigation or any sort of regular irrigation that you're going to have, basically because of a lot of what's come up in the discussion today, we're talking about these overwatering, which really opens up the growth of weeds, but it also occupies the pore space or that water retention capacity from a stormwater perspective. So we really, for those systems, it's only when it's going to be irrigated regularly, routinely with a permanent system installed. That irrigation factor of 0.5 is not necessary in the system. Most systems, which would just have a hose bib or some other access, like Claudia mentioned, that you need some sort of access to water. That's one of the things that makes maintenance difficult if they can't get water to the plants. So you have to have a water source available to be able to water during establishment and during the drought periods. But that's not what we're talking about for that 0.5 irrigation factor. It's only when you're going to be permanently and regularly keeping that soil moist, more so than you would have in an unirrigated system. Hopefully that clears it up for you. We have another question here. Would it be beneficial to the green roof system to inoculate the media with mycorrhizal fungi to help with plant establishment?
So yeah, mycorrhizal fungi, they help plants establish more quickly and boost healthy growth by supplying additional water and nutrients. And it could therefore help the plants resist drought. But I think costs would play into that as well if we were incorporating amendments into the entire green roof. There would be an additional cost that would go into it. And a lot of times we're seeing that transplanting during the fall and the spring is enough to allow the plants to establish and begin to cover the roofs effectively and quickly enough to apply to achieve full coverage within that 2-year window.
Yeah, I would say that not all plants have a mycorrhizal association. So, and most mycorrhizal communities are species specific. So you might have trouble on the market finding the inoculant that would suit your particular plant set, because green roofs are pretty esoteric. So there are plenty of mycorrhizal products for Douglas fir because the forestry is big, or for row crop agriculture. But I think if you talk to the people up at Penn State that test soil, after a few years, the mycorrhizal community is there because it's in the air, it's ubiquitous. So I think I agree with Tom. It would be an expense, and you may not hit the right formulation either. But someone will sell it to you. I'm sure of that.
It looks like I missed one from earlier on. Going back, someone asked about the if you had to use supplemental irrigation during the recent spring drought, and if not, have you seen a plant decline in your unirrigated roofs?
Claudia, you want to answer that one?
No, I was gonna say, Tom, want to take that? So we have been doing some hand watering now, going back to the spring. Tom, we got through that. Last
got through
year,
the
that
spring.
Philadelphia, was particularly, that was like 9 straight weeks without rain. And that is such a rare occurrence. That's a real, that really affected, that, but we got through the spring, I think, without supplemental hand irrigation.
Yeah, there was that span in June that Ed was alluding to, where we were completing hand watering visits. We did install a few temporary irrigation systems at a couple of roofs. We were able to make it through pretty much unscathed this year. The Philadelphia roof that we had a picture of and that Claudia was just talking about, we saw a drought occur in July of 22. That's where those pictures were from.
Yeah, the saving grace this spring was the nighttime temperatures were cool. So the plant stress, even though there was no water, there wasn't that high nighttime 80-degree temperature that there is in July and August. So the water stress was there, but the heat stress hadn't arrived yet. So you didn't get the full stress.
Does anybody else have any questions they want to throw in before we sign off? I think we've addressed everything that's in there. So I'm just gonna throw up my contact information here. If you have any follow-up questions, you can direct them to me and or Ed or Claudia or Tom. If you can't remember their information, you can send it to me and I'll make sure it gets to the right person. But I want to thank everyone who participated today, especially our presenters, for sharing their expertise and their experience and knowledge in this area. It's a fascinating field to be in right now. It's a lot to learn and a lot that's been learned. So it's nice to see all of that knowledge being kind of compiled and put together here from your years of learning on this. And thank you all for joining. It's a good turnout today. We haven't done this presentation or this training for a while, so it's nice to see the good turnout and seeing people tuning in and learning on. Hopefully you'll take away some knowledge from today that you'll apply in general for green roofs, and specifically if you're working in DC, and we'll see some of this knowledge coming through on the plans we look at DOEE. So please feel free to reach out if you have any other questions, and thank you all. I'll have a last thank you to the presenters, and take care, everyone.
Thank you.